Welcome to lesson number 1, and in this lesson we're going to focus on how did the Bible come into being. And the purpose of this lesson is to be amazed about the uniqueness of the Bible. Now I would like to start with a very important question. Why should we have some understanding of how the Bible came to us? And then the important answer is to realize that the Bible, like creation, is an amazing miracle. Now, why do we say that? Now, although the Bible was written on 3 continents, in 3 different languages, over a period of about 1500 years, by more than 40 authors from all walks of life, the Bible as a whole forms a brilliant unit. And that makes the Bible such a unique book among other books. Now, the Bible just did not simply drop from the sky, but it came into being through a fascinating but complicated process. Now, the best way to understand this complicated process is to focus on a few things: the dispute, the 2 traditions, the languages, the councils, and the empires in this process. So let us first start with the dispute. Now, in this dispute, there were a few role players. The first one is the Jews, then the Roman Catholic Church, as well as the Protestants. Now, this dispute was mainly about the books that needed to be included in the Bible, and others feel that but some books don't need to be included in the Bible. Now, it all started when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, and it's called the Septuagint. Now, the reason why the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek is that there was a Jewish diaspora, and many Jews settled in Alexandria, and then they started to speak Greek. That was the language of the time, and their children also started to speak Greek, and they wanted the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, in their language, their new language, which is Greek. And what happened, about 70 people, and that's the word meaning of Septuagint, it's believed that 70 people translated the Hebrew Bible. They also included other writings which were in circulation, especially in Alexandria. And this is very important because this prompted the dispute, these 15 books. And they were written between 400 BC at the time of Jesus Christ. Now, why were they the reason for the dispute? Because these writings are known as Apocrypha. And many people felt, but those 15 books, we cannot add them to the Hebrew Bible. And that caused the dispute. Now, let us just focus on the word Apocrypha. Now, Apocrypha is derived from the Greek word apokryptos, and it means hidden or concealed. Now, it doesn't mean to hide something physically, but rather that these books were not meant for everyone. Probably for a small group of believers who could understand the hidden truths. Now, these books were apparently not used in the Christian gatherings and therefore not regarded by the Protestants as inspired. Now, the Jews also did not include them in their Hebrew Bible. But however, the Roman Catholic Church did include 12 of the 15 books in their Bible. So they've included 12 of the Apocrypha books in their Bible. Now, the reason is that the Roman Catholics argued that the Apocrypha was an integral part of the early church and should be included in the list of inspired Old Testament books. Well, it is true that the Apocrypha books do have some value because they paint a picture of the cultural and religious attitudes in Judaism before the appearance of Christianity. Now, the books which are included by the Jews, Roman Catholic Church, in their Bibles, as well as the Protestants, are known as the canonical books. Now, the word canon, this is very important because canon is actually the opposite of Apocrypha. The word canon is derived from an Egyptian word means reed, measure, or standard. Canon means it meets the requirement or standard, and in this case, meeting the requirements for a holy or inspired book. Now, for a general summary, the Jews did not accept the apocryphal book as part of their Bible. Protestants also did not accept the apocryphal books as part of their Bible. However, the Roman Catholic Church accepted 12 of the apocryphal books in their Bible. And now the other main thing in this dispute, before I get to the two traditions, a very good thing. However, Protestants, Catholics, as well as Greek Orthodox Christians agree on the 27 books for the composition of the New Testament. It was only the dispute was actually about the 15 books of the Apocrypha. Now we get to the two traditions of how the Bible came into being. Now, amazing. The Bible evolved over a time span of approximately 1500 years. Now, this time span can be divided in an oral tradition or a written tradition. Now, the oral tradition lasted for centuries as families passed along the stories of their ancestors to each new generation before they were written down in a final form. It's important to remember that the oral tradition had the same authority as the written tradition. Eventually, the oral tradition has steadily evolved in a written tradition as societies in the Near East began to develop the art of writing. Now, the books of the Bible were not written at one time. It was a process, and it took centuries. While some of the books were being written and collected, other books were still being passed on in storytelling fashion. So you can see it slowly evolved from oral into the written tradition. Now let us go to the languages. Most of the original manuscripts of the Old Testament were written in Hebrew. Although a few chapters of Ezra and Daniel were recorded in Aramaic, that's a dialect of Hebrew, and that was also the language spoken by Jesus, Aramaic. Now the New Testament was written in the 1st century AD and was written in Greek because it was the most spoken language around the Mediterranean at that time. And then we had the first translations of the Bible. The first one was the Septuagint. It was from Hebrew into Greek. And then the Roman Empire took over, and eventually the New World language became Latin. And the Latin version of the Bible we call, and we go to the top of the page, it's named the Vulgate. It is the official text of the Roman Catholic Church. Now the first English translation was by John Wycliffe, but he did not know Hebrew or Greek, therefore it was a translation from the Latin Vulgate. Now the advent of printing did great things for the Bible. Well, the first book that was ever printed was the Bible, and it aided the transmission of biblical text. And then we have the King James Version in 1611 AD. It is the translation from the original Hebrew and Greek into English, where John Wycliffe translated it from Latin. The King James was translated from the original languages. Then next, we have the councils. A council is another word for synod, and they played a very important role in the origin of the Bible. Now, the three councils that we would like to mention is Jamnia, Carthage, and Trent. Let's turn the page, and you see the picture there. You see that Carthage, it is in northern Africa, Trent is in northern Italy, and Jamnia is in Israel. Now, I've just skipped the page here. Now, the Council of Jamnia was actually about the Old Testament, and this is important to know. It's about the Old Testament, and it was a Jewish council. It was by Jewish rabbis. They were concerned about the upcoming and growing Christian church with their new writings, and they had that meeting in Jamnia to determine their Jewish canon. Now, the Jewish canon contains the same books as the Old Testament of the Protestant Bible. And then you have the Council of Carthage in northern Africa. This was mainly about the New Testament. So although the New Testament took shape over roughly 100 years, and it was virtually complete by the early 2nd century AD. It took another 2 or 3 centuries for the church to begin defining the canon, the inspired books of the New Testament. Now, I think it's also important to note that the council merely gave the formal approval to the 27 books. Now, those books already had authority in the church. The council just came together and just gave formal authority to that. Then we have the Council of Trent. Now, the Council of Trent was not about the Old Testament, it was not about the New Testament, it was about the Apocrypha books of the 15 Apocrypha books. The dispute was between the upcoming or the emerging Protestants and the Roman Catholics, because the Protestants did not recognize the Apocrypha as authoritative. Consequently, it led to the Council of Trent, and there the Roman Catholic Church accepted the Apocrypha officially as part of their Bible. And then lastly, we have the empires. During the Old Testament, the scholars agree that it came into being in the time of the Assyrian Empire, Babylonian, Persian, and Greek empires. And the New Testament came into being during the Roman Empire. But interesting to note, the New Testament was written in Greek and not in Latin, because the Greek culture, even under the Roman government, was very, very strong. Let's go to the next page. There you will see a summary, a picture of how the Bible came into being. You see the different traditions, the languages, the councils, and the empires. Very complex, but a fascinating process, how the Bible came into being, and still it has a wonderful unit. Some general remarks. Where does the name Bible come from? It comes from the Greek word biblia, meaning books. And then we also have manuscripts of the Bible. Although we don't have the original manuscripts of the Bible, we do have manuscripts that still exist today. Now, some of the very important manuscripts are the Codex Leningradensis from 1008 after AD. It is the oldest complete manuscript of the Old Testament. And then the next one is the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's very famous. They were discovered in 11 caves along the northwest shore between the years 1947 and 1956. And they contain the entire book of Isaiah and portions of every other Old Testament book but Esther. Then you have the Codex Sinaiticus. It contains the entire New Testament and almost the entire Old Testament in Greek. Then we go to the next page. The last one is Codex Vaticanus. It is an almost complete New Testament, and it was catalogued as being in the Vatican Library since 1475. Now, the word codex actually means an unbound book, just to distinguish it from the papyrus rolls. Now, the Old Testament contains of two major divisions. The first one is the Old Testament. It contains of 39 books, and the New Testament 27 books. So 39 for the Old Testament. If you times 3 by 9, you get 27 books of the New Testament. So it's an easy way to remember. Now, the Bible is called a testament because it comes from the Latin word testamentum, and testamentum is the Latin word for covenant, the Hebrew word berit, covenant. So to summarize, we see that the Bible did not just drop from the sky, but it came into being through a fascinating but complicated process. No other book has such a history. No other book has influenced humanity more than the Bible. And for believers, it is indeed God's word that gives life. For the next page, you can go into a group discussion if you're part of a group. Thank you.